Hi folks, we'll be starting soon. Thanks for waiting. Give us a couple of minutes and we'll let everybody join the meeting. Okay, hi all. Welcome to our webinar, Redefining B2B Collaboration and Employee Experience with Microsoft 365. So this is always a Microsoft Teams live event, so we'll work through this and try and walk you through the steps. Now, what I'll do just now is go through a little agenda and give you an idea of what today is about, and then we will start the webinar. So this morning we have two guests, Daniel Anderson and Kenny Singh from Valo and Microsoft respectively. So we'll do a little introduction about myself and the two speakers. Then what we want to do is have a little open discussion around business-to-business collaboration and Azure AD with Kenny. And then we're going to just understand a little bit about the business context, some of the pain points and the gaps that we can try and fill by using this business-to-business collaboration. And then we're going to demo Valo Entrance, which is that portal tool, and that kind of creates a gateway for your organization to collaborate with other users. Now we do have Q&A enabled, so if you want to ask a question, please do so. We'll do our best to answer the questions during the session, and we'll put some time at the end just to kind of go through any main ones, and if there's any others that are outstanding, we're happy to follow up afterwards. So a little bit about myself. My name is McWhirter. I am the Principal Consultant and Director of Digital First. I'm an experienced technology consultant. I've worked across multiple sectors. My background's a little bit combined. You know, my original background was business consultancy, but I also have a background in technology. You know, having a degree in computer science, so I've kind of merged the two. I founded Digital First in 2016, mainly as a sort of platform for us to look at building solutions for clients. I saw there was a real need to kind of take that solution focus using the kind of combination of business and technology. Right now, as a business, we're focused on digital workplace strategy and looking at how we can help companies create that sort of employee-centric workplace. I'm really passionate about technology in general, and what's really important, this is I think what's really important about today's webinar, is I'm very passionate about the technology partners that we work with at Digital First. Now today, obviously, we've invited Microsoft and Valo, and we're going to be looking at a Valo product, and we really believe that bringing these technologies together on top of sort of the Microsoft platform is a really great way to go. So we also have Daniel Anderson. So Daniel, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, g'day. Thanks, Grant. Thanks everybody for joining. If you're watching the recording, hope this brings you some value. As Grant mentioned, my name's Daniel Anderson. I'm from Valo, and I am the partner manager, product evangelist, and also a Microsoft MVP. And I work closely with our Valo partner network, and especially with our partner of the year, Digital First, last year. And I've been, I guess, delivering digital workplace solutions and intranets and extranets for quite some time now. So really glad to join you, Grant, in this webinar. And let's get stuck into it.
Yep. And Kenny, how about yourself?
Thanks, Grant. Look, once again, thank you so much for the opportunity. So my name is Kenny Singh. I'm from Microsoft. I'm the product manager for cybersecurity and compliance here in Microsoft Australia. I've been in Microsoft for a while. I was in Microsoft Consulting Services, or MCS, as it's called sometimes, for about 5.5, 6 years. Then I've transitioned across to the partner organization as a cybersecurity and compliance lead. And now my current role, I basically lead cybersecurity and compliance for the Australian subsidiary here in Microsoft Australia, in the role of the product manager for cybersecurity and compliance. And that's me, Grant. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much. Okay, so the next thing we want to do as part of the webinar is just go into a little bit of an open discussion. We want to pick Kenny's brain and get some amazing Microsoft insights. So we've sort of prepared a few questions just to sort of spark conversation and allow Kenny to tell some of the kind of new trends from Microsoft. So I think that the really important question, what today's about, is this external sharing and business to business, you know, taking your organization and allowing you to share your resources and things with other business to business clients through Microsoft 365. So I guess the first question is, you know, how does Microsoft represent guest and external accounts in Active Directory? Because I think for a lot of particularly technical people and those who are concerned about security, this is a really important question for them.
No, thanks, Grant. So let me just give a little bit of a historical context, right? So I'm guessing most of us are actually very familiar with the on-premises identity store called Active Directory. You know, we actually have Active Directory in most of the Fortune 500 companies and customers across the globe. So there's an incredible proliferation of Active Directory, and it actually powers a whole raft of on-premises software. You know, from Microsoft software, for example, SharePoint Exchange, to SAP, to any kind of application that lives on premises. At some point, it's actually had some degree of integration with Active Directory. The evolution of Active Directory was the cloud identity provider, cloud directory called Azure Active Directory. Right, so Azure Active Directory, it's not just Active Directory in the cloud. It's essentially a modernized directory, a modernized identity provider that provides not just an identity store, but support for the modern protocols, for example, OAuth and OpenID Connect and SAML 2.0 and a whole raft of other protocols that have actually become very prevalent and very reputed on the internet today. So Azure Active Directory basically has, if I may describe it like this, an umbrella called external identities, or a capability set called external identities. With external identities, you basically have the capability of collaborating seamlessly with your partners, with your consultants, with anyone who's actually not directly a part of your organization. We also have a variant of Azure AD External Directory. So the first one that I just mentioned is called B2B, Azure AD Business to Business. So that's where you collaborate with your partners, with external entities, and you can collaborate on documents in Office 365 or your Power BI reports or what have you. The second flavor of Azure AD External Identities is called Azure AD B2C. And B2C is all about that business to customer connection, business to customer relationships. So, for example, building websites, large websites with customers interacting with those websites. Let's say an online banking application or a government information portal or something like that. That's where typically you would use Azure AD B2C.
That's great. Thanks, Kenny. So that's great. So I guess for the purposes of working in Office 365, we're looking at B2B, Azure B2B rather than B2C in the context of what we're looking at. Okay, so let's flip on to the next question and give Daniel the honours.
Thanks, Grant. Yeah, great insights there, Kenny. Now, in terms of this question, I guess this is kind of twofold. First of all, can you explain a little bit about Zero Trust and also how Azure AD in the B2B context provides coverage for that Zero Trust as well?
So there's a lot of there's a lot of sound bites these days about Zero Trust. There's a lot of hype about it. There's a lot of discussion about it on the internet and beyond. The reason why Zero Trust, just my 2 cents, right? So the reason I think why Zero Trust has actually become so prevalent is because, as Satya, our CEO at Microsoft, says that in 6 months during COVID-19, we actually saw digital transformation worth 2 to 3 years. Right? So we were essentially forced to work from home, use corporate devices, sometimes use personal devices. So the whole paradigm of hybrid work, remote work, almost became instantaneously real for all of us, yeah, and which actually brought with it all the pros and cons that actually happen when a change of this magnitude takes place. So how Zero Trust ties into that is that Zero Trust is particularly suited as a set of let's say principles, as a paradigm to really orchestrate a cybersecurity strategy that basically deals quite effectively with people working from anywhere, on any device, data living on premises or in the cloud. So what Zero Trust basically means is it actually says 3 things fundamentally. So the first thing is that irrespective of where the person is logging on to the application from or what data they access, we always assume breach, which basically means that even if a user is on the corporate network, as an example, that doesn't automatically mean that the user's access attempt to corporate data is safe. Let me give you a specific example. What happens if the user is on the corporate network, as an example, and the user is using a managed device? So this is a device that's directly controlled by the organization. But what if there's malware on that device? Do we still trust that device? Without assuming breach, if we basically say, if someone comes from this boundary, whether that's a corporate network or that's a managed device, they implicitly have access, that's a very dangerous strategy. Right? So that's number one. The second thing Zero Trust basically says is that you only grant privileges that are commensurate to the action that the user needs to perform. So you don't give people a blanket admin access and so on and so forth. So that's the second principle. And the third principle is whenever we give access to data, we always explicitly verify, right? Which basically means we look at whether the user logon is exhibiting any anomalous behavior, whether the data that is being accessed from a device that the user is on that might be potentially infected. Things like that. So we actually take a whole raft of signals into consideration to really assess whether the user in that specific authentication context should have access to that data or not. So how that ties in with Azure AD B2B is that because Azure AD B2B, just by its very nature of being a part of Azure Active Directory. So essentially, if I may just quickly touch on this, B2B accounts or B2B guest accounts, as we call them. In fact, I'm going to take a back step. In Azure AD, you actually have 2 kinds of accounts. You have members and you have guests. Azure AD B2B accounts are all guests, right? When you apply a Zero Trust policy, for example, a policy that actually says only grant access to my corporate information if the user is not exhibiting any anomalous behavior. For example, they didn't log on from Sydney and 2 hours later they logged on from, let's say Los Angeles. Yeah, that's anomalous behavior. Only if the user is exhibiting that kind of behavior or the user is coming from a device that we deem is perfectly safe, only then grant the user access. That conditional access policy, as we call it, or the Zero Trust policy in industry terms, equally applies to guest accounts, Azure AD B2B accounts, as it actually does to member accounts or core Azure AD accounts. So basically, Azure AD B2B completely supports this whole Zero Trust framework. So the implication of all of this is that irrespective of where your guest accounts or where your guest users are, whether they're working from home, whether they're actually working from another office location or somewhere globally, they're also subject to the same Zero Trust policies that your internal staff is subject to. I hope that answers your question, Dan.
That's great.
It does, and I think that's really a really important point, and we often get a lot of questions about that type of whether it's conditional access or some type of policy around those guest accounts and around those external users coming into let's say our tenant. And just ensuring that you know that our data is protected and that we can control who is accessing that data and how where they're accessing that from. So it's a really important point, and it is something a common topic that is starting to come more to the forefront now, and being able to provide guest access into your corporate environment is becoming obviously very important as well. So being able to and being organizations having that confidence now to be able to securely allow those people in is really important.
Absolutely, and seamlessly, right? Like in the sense that it's not a separate directory, it's the same directory. It has member accounts, it has guest accounts, and you can apply all your cybersecurity policies, including your zero trust policies, equally to your guest accounts as you would to member accounts.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, thanks for that, Kenny. Okay, so what have we got next? So what kind of third-party identity providers are supported within Azure AD B2B? So I guess one of the kind of things around this is obviously you don't have to be on M365 to have a B2B connection. So could you just maybe explain that a little bit, Kenny, and give us an idea of how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, when you have a member account, or account type equals member in Azure Active Directory, that account physically lives in Azure Active Directory. When we say live in Azure Active Directory, its authentication information lives in Azure Active Directory. Now, there are complexities on that. For example, if the account is synchronized from an on-premise Active Directory, you actually have the choice of a couple of authentication models. Either you can basically do federation through SAML 2.0 or password hash sync. So there's a few permutations and combinations, but fundamentally, that account actually lives in Azure Active Directory, and Azure Active Directory, one way or the other, is responsible for the authentication. So when the user logs on to a specific application, Azure Active Directory is responsible for the authentication or brokering the authentication. With Azure AD B2B accounts or guest accounts, Azure Active Directory basically have what we call a shadow representation of the account. So the guest account in Azure Active Directory is a shadow account. So what that shadow word basically means is that we only have bare minimum information about the guest account, right? So for example, we'll actually have an email address for the guest. So just one or two bits of information, but Azure Active Directory fundamentally is not handling the authentication for that account. We support a number of third-party providers that customers can use as their Azure AD B2B sources. Some of these providers include Google, so Gmail accounts, Google accounts, they're completely supported. Facebook accounts are supported. One-time passcodes. So if someone didn't want to use a social media account or some other form of identity like Google, they can absolutely use a one-time passcode to collaborate with people using Azure Active Directory B2B. And then we also have the option of what we call direct federation. So direct federation is where a customer has established explicitly a federation trust between their Azure Active Directory and another identity store that belongs to a partner organization, as an example. So there's a very rich set of identity providers, integrations that are available for Azure AD B2B.
Yeah, great. So you're not just restricted to Microsoft, you have this open platform, which I think is going to be useful for a lot of organizations. So Kenny, the next question is actually, I'm going to skip over it because we've kind of covered a little bit. You talked about the difference between Azure B2B and B2C at the start of this. So do you want to just reconfirm for everybody just where the questions here, but I know we kind of touched on that a little bit at the start.
So Azure AD B2B is that part of external identities, or the whole external identities framework of Azure Active Directory that deals fundamentally with partner collaboration, right? So you would use B2B, if I may just pick a couple of scenarios, you would use B2B if you want to collaborate with your partners or with external entities on documents stored in Office 365 or any application for that matter that basically uses Azure Active Directory as their identity store. And there's thousands of applications today that actually use Azure Active Directory as their identity store. For example, Salesforce and the ServiceNow and a whole raft of other applications that can be ID directly as an identity store. So yeah, so you would actually use B2B for that purpose. So where you actually want to collaborate with external partners on on any assets, on any digital assets, any documents that live in your environment, but you need to collaborate with them on. B2C, on the other side, or on the other hand, is basically a mechanism for building websites that actually require rich identity stores, or portals or applications that require rich identity stores, where you're actually fundamentally bringing in a lot of customers. So for example, I'll give you a few examples of Azure AD B2C. So you'd use Azure AD B2C, let's say if you're actually building a university portal for students, right, where they can actually come and download their course material. Now, in that scenario, if your students wanted to collaborate with teachers in Office 365, you would use B2B.
Yeah.
If you actually wanted to build a completely separate application that allows you your students access to their course material with no integration with Office 365 or some of your other applications, standalone application, you would use Azure AD B2C because it'd be very optimized for that. So yeah, so different use cases. Azure AD B2C is not going to work with Office 365. Like in the sense that right now it doesn't work with Office 365. That doesn't mean that might not change in the future, or that will not change in the future. That may change in the future. But at this moment in time, if you have an Azure AD B2C user, they can't access an Office 365 document. Azure AD B2B users can.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that, Kenny. I think the last sort of question that we have for you is a really important one. We find this for a lot of clients, both Daniel and myself, around. Oh, am I going backwards? Sorry. Yeah. So one of the things we find a lot of customers is the question of how many external users can I actually have on my account, and I understand talking to you yesterday that that's actually changed. And previously it used to be a ratio of 1 to 5, internal accounts versus external. Can you just maybe explain some of the changes that are happening around licensing for external guest users?
Absolutely, yeah. So previously, the way Azure AD B2B licensing worked is that if you had one Azure AD Premium P1 license, you would have up to 5 guest users you could invite and collaborate with in your environment, right? So practically, if you wanted 50,000 guest users, hypothetically speaking, you would need at least 10,000 Azure AD Premium P1 licenses. We've changed that. We've really simplified it, and we've actually tried to make it as let's say consistent across B2B and B2C as we possibly can. So now you basically get 50,000 monthly active users as a part of the core Azure AD B2B capability. And then you can basically step up from there. So if you do a quick search for Azure AD pricing under external identities, you're actually going to see this pricing. So the free tier includes these 50,000 monthly active users, which in the past would have actually required you to purchase 10,000 Azure AD Premium P1 licenses. So we've significantly simplified. That said, if you are a very large organization, let's say if the organization has 50,000 Azure AD Premium P1 licenses already, then you would actually have by default 250,000, 50,000 times 5, 250,000 guest accounts that you can basically invite and collaborate with. So that still stays. We've just simplified let's say the core package where you get these 50,000 monthly active users that you can basically use as a part of the core base package.
Wow, that's really impressive. I think Daniel and I are both. I mean, Daniel, do you want to touch on the impact that might have on clients that you're working with?
Yeah, well, as we alluded to before, I mean the license. I mean, licensing is always a difficult one to tackle, and external or guest accounts is one of those areas. And having moving from 1 to 5 is now to what you're saying as 50,000 is going to make a really big impact to people actually using using that capability now. That's a really good change. So yeah, excited to be able to deliver that to customers now too. That's good.
So I'm just going to put, there's just a question coming in I just want to touch on. It's published the limit about 5 external guest users for every internal user is only about the B2B licensing, or also, for example, for guest users in SharePoint. So you can just confirm, Kenny, that's the whole M365 environment, so SharePoint, etc.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Yeah. So if you actually have, let's say if you actually buy an Azure AD Premium P1 license, that license gives access to about 5 guest users, not about, but precisely 5, up to 5 guest users, may I actually say, that can collaborate with you across OneDrive for Business, SharePoint, and so on and so forth. So yeah, so that actually extends across Microsoft 365.
Great, thanks. Well, that's really interesting. You know, I think Daniel and I are both very excited by that news, so that's great. So thanks for that, Kenny. I've really enjoyed picking your brain there. So what we're going to do next is we've talked a lot of technical here, which I think for a lot of people was kind of really explored the sort of security and how people can actually, you know, have that relationship with their business-to-business clients in a secure manner. What I now want to do is just to talk about some of our experiences in the field of clients, and maybe set some of the business context, so that when we look at the demo, we can kind of picture some of the scenarios. So where we sort of looked at was, you know, like when we talk about B2B, what does B2B actually mean, and how might that manifest itself in your organization? And I think that for me, those sort of 5 key areas, now obviously these can be layered and it can go down a lot further than this, but I think that, you know, one of the main ones is obviously customers. And I think that can be either clients or also member organizations, depending on how your business is structured. And, you know, many of the resources, so if you think about SharePoint or Microsoft Teams, many of the resources that you might want to share with large groups of customers can then be produced, and you can provide access to that information for those. You know, likewise, the same sort of idea for suppliers. You may have information or contracts or you know, documentation that you share of your suppliers that you want to share and provide them with immediate access to. I think the product and service delivery partners, you know, I can think of a few examples where perhaps you have a brand that you work with, and you have a lot of branding and marketing material and information about that product or service. You want to be able to share that with certain people, possibly even member organizations that work with you. That's certainly something that we've seen recently from a couple of clients. The other one, I think, when we look at perhaps larger organizations, you know, particularly things like major infrastructure and construction, where they have a large amount of subcontractors, these are the kind of areas where, you know, you can divide, you can have, you know, health and safety, lots of different things around subcontractor management, and general, you know, policies and procedures, etc. And then, you know, the final one is professional services, where you may want to have a secure area for your accounting firms or legal firms, and actually share information and collaborate on that. I think that, you know, what is it you're actually accessing? And I think that what we can look at is, obviously the first one is the kind of the idea of an extranet, and where you can actually bring people into one source spot where you can share news, updates, links to key information, and it kind of bleeds into a lot of the other points here around a customer portal where you can have that product information and updates. The serve service, you know, this is something that we're going to look at a little bit shortly. The idea where you can actually have this portal and provide access to other resources. It doesn't need to be within Microsoft 365. You can create integrations and actually provide customers with the chance and the capability to service themselves, and that will obviously reduce costs and internal overhead around that customer interaction. I think project sites is one that we see a lot just because of our type of business. You know, we share a lot of, we have project site templates with risk registers and issue registers, and we've actually started to leverage that within both Microsoft SharePoint as a SharePoint project site, but also bringing things like lists into Teams tabs. So by, you know, by creating these templates, you can actually really enhance the interaction around projects, not just shared documents. You can actually use Microsoft lists, you can use Power Apps, you can do a lot of things in here where you can really push the realms of what Microsoft 365 is. And again, I think I sort of touched on in the previous slide around marketing material and templates, you know, managing contracts and, you know, and keeping people up to date. Now, what we wanted to look at before we jump into demo is just to discuss a little bit about the common pain points that we found and what we're trying to solve here with with Valo Entrance. So being able to provide a single secure entry point for all external stakeholders. So one of the things that's really, I guess, in my experience, a little bit of a gap is that having a really branded experience for your external users. At the moment, you get an email invite to a team, or you've been granted permission to a SharePoint site. But what we really want to do is give them that branded experience. They're going to log on to a URL and they're going to link and they're going to securely register themselves using Azure B2B, and they're going to be provided with a list of resources that they can access. The other element is actually the invitation process and how you actually provide access to the resources. Now, obviously, we'll probably all added people to Microsoft Teams and SharePoint sites, but how do you actually manage that holistically? It's okay if there's one or two people on a project, but when you've got larger projects or you've got moving components, it becomes harder to manage these external resources and the stakeholders themselves. And that kind of bleeds into the next bit, which is actually ensuring that the right people have access to the resources that they require securely. That doesn't just mean the people that you have in your team right now that you're sharing with. Also, when somebody else is onboarded into a project, how can you actually give them that access without having to go through, laborious IT? Now, obviously, there's levels of access that you might want to restrict during an onboarding process, but from a generic perspective, can you give somebody access when they're onboarded into a project? And we'll see a little bit about that as well with domains. Look, the other thing that's really interesting is the burden of external management. There's been a lot of sort of, to coin a phrase, technical debt built up with Microsoft Teams. Everybody's reacted with COVID-19, and there's now a huge flourish of Microsoft Teams, and by extension, that means there's a flourish of Office 365 groups and SharePoint sites sitting in your tenant, and these are going to start to become a real burden for IT to manage. And if we can sort of start to find a way to make that a little bit more comfortable when we are doing external sharing, then there's, it's a compliance issue, and it's something that we kind of see quite a lot. And I think that IT are struggling at the moment across a lot of organizations to manage this, and we want to try and find a solution. And I guess the final part is the actual life cycle management of the access, and how do you actually archive and ensure that all users who do not require access, are removed at the right point. So these are the sort of key areas. Daniel, before we go into demos, is there anything you want to add to that, or are you?
No, I think you've covered everything very well there. Obviously all the, especially around the process of inviting external users and making sure that that's done in a secure way and an easy way is always the key points, and being able to manage that in a I guess in a more fluent way is something that's really important and provides a lot of value and makes things a lot easier as well.
Great. Okay, well, I think it's time to have a little look at Valo.
All right, thank you very much, Grant. I will bring my screen up and we'll go through a couple of different aspects here that we've already spoken about and alluded to throughout the conversations with Grant and Kenny. Now, the concept here or the story here is that we're a leasing company. So it's called Valo Leasing. This is our extranet site. So it's a SharePoint site built in Office 365 and obviously SharePoint Online. And this is the place where we want all of our leasing partners across the globe to come to access all of our information, whether that be news, documents, forms, people, any type of information that we want to publish to all of our external stakeholders. Now, ordinarily, traditionally, what people may have had to do is either use the out-of-the-box way of sharing, where we're going to, SharePoint settings, sharing sites, or adding them as guest users into AD and then allowing them access. Now, what we can do, and one of our products at Valo is called Valo Entrance. Now, what we're seeing on the screen here is the Valo Entrance dashboard, and this is, I guess, the heart of of how we go about managing our external users and giving them access to the resources that we want to provide them to. So we've got a concept that we call an access unit. So what an access unit is, and you can see these on the screen here, and you can see these little icons. This means that I own these access units. So these access units are basically containers where we allow our external users into those access units, and then we match them or marry them and give them access to resources. So what we can do, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through the process of creating an access unit. So what we'll do here is we'll give this access unit a name, and we'll call this Digital First Extranet. So we'll create this access unit. Now, once this gets created, we've got a couple of different options for us to configure and set up inside of this access unit. So we've got resources that we need to provide access to, and we've also got the allowed the external users that we're going to allow to access those resources. So we can see here I've got two options. I can post or provide access to certain links. Now, given that this is the site that we want to grant access to, I'm going to grab this link and I'm going to add this as a new resource. So we'll paste that link in here, and we'll give this a name called Extranet Portal, and we'll add that as a link. Now, as we know, SharePoint is controlled by security groups. So what we've got as part of this this extranet site here is a security group here that we've called Valo Leasing External Users. So what we're also going to do is add a new group resource, which means that any external user that's part of this access unit is automatically going to be added to this security group, which in turn is automatically going to add them and grant them access to that particular SharePoint site. Okay, so we've now added, let's just give this a description as well. And we can add them to that particular group. Now that user has been added to that external group, we're going to jump back into the access unit. So we can see here, I'm just going to jump into a different one here as well. And we can see that we've got the link here, and we've also got under the groups tab, we've also now got a group called Valo Leasing External Users. So we've now published a link, and we've also now published a group. Now, the next step is, who do we want to allow to have access to this portal? So you can see in this next section, I've got this allowed emails dialog box or tab here. And we've got two different options. So what we can do is we can allow certain individual email addresses. So I can pop my email address in here, and we can allow that email address the ability to go and register themselves, because it's a self-service process, register themselves to be granted access to this portal. Now, not only can we add individual people, but let's say we're in a partner scenario or a B2B scenario, and we want everybody from an entire company to then have the ability to go and self-register for access to this portal. So rather than manually adding all of the users in individually, what we can also do is add an entire domain. So if I pop in this entire domain here, what that is going to mean is that anybody with an email address of valointranet.com is now allowed to go to the self-service portal, sign themselves up as an external user. They're automatically going to be added to this security group, which in turn is automatically going to give them access to this portal, all in an automated process. So there's no messing around with sending out individual email invitations, adding them to security groups. We've got this access unit all set up so that it's a nice automated process. So at this point, nothing happens. But what that user can now do is visit this self-service registration portal, okay? And it's a public-facing website. Anybody can come here, hit this, and if I'm on an allowed or part of an access unit and I've been allowed to go and register, what I can do as a new user is actually go and sign up. All right, so the first step is that user is allowed to come to this portal, click sign up, pop their email address in, and then what's going to happen is an email invitation will be sent. So I'll just pop this email address in here. And if I spell it correctly, that would be even better. ValoIntranet.com. We've got the ability to also add a privacy policy, so it ensures that the external user has agreed to that. And we've also got a reCAPTCHA here as well. So we're now going to sign up. So what happens here, the registration request has been sent, and I will now receive an email that will welcome me to this portal, and we'll just wait for that to come through here. And I've just heard a bing, and that has now come through. Now, again, where this differs and where this is really valuable for you as an organization is that these emails can be branded. So traditionally, and the out of the box way with Microsoft is that we get a Microsoft branded email. We don't have too much capability or flexibility in what that email looks like. But with Valo, with Valo Entrance, what we can do is customize our email invitations. So you can see here it's branded to the leasing company. We've got a nice image, we've got some text, and we've got the button here that allows us to accept that invitation. So once that invitation has been accepted, that means that in the background, what is happening is that everything, the user is then granted access, added to the security groups that they need to be added to that are part of that access unit, and we can then go ahead and log in. So when I click the login button, and after that user has logged in, then what we will do is jump back over here, and as we like to do with live demos, things always work as expected. So just give me 2 seconds to have a look at this. So I'll just sign out and sign back in again.
So the way the live demos, isn't it, Daniel? Technology only.
You gotta love live demos. Yeah. So I'm just reloading this. So just give me a sec. All right, so demo gods are not with me. So what we're going to do is flick over to a different environment now where we're going to log in. So after we've accepted that, that email invitation that has come through, what we're presented with is what we call the lobby. So we've gone through the self-service registration. we've accepted the invitation, we've logged back in now, and now what we can see on the screen here is access to all of the resources that have been published as part of that access unit. So we can see here we've got a number of different links that we've been provided. And we've also now got the ability to also publish our Microsoft Teams. So as part of that access unit, what we can do is also provide access to Microsoft Teams. So in this on this screen here, I've opened up the access unit again. We've got the link that we've published. We've got the groups that they're a member of, but we can also add Microsoft Teams that we're an owner of. So inside of this group here, what we could do is also add this particular user to a group. So only the groups that I've got access to or are an owner of will allow me to add that any external user to. All right, so not only can we provide access to the SharePoint environment and the SharePoint sites, we can also then add users to the Microsoft Teams, and they're separated out into different categories inside of our lobby. So you can see here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different areas of this community and this extranet that I've got access to, and I've also got the Microsoft team that has been published. And when a user clicks on that particular link in the lobby there, it's going to take them, because I'm already signed in, it's going to take them directly to that particular site. And you can see that site opening up here. This is the extranet. It's going to load and I've got access to everything that I need to based on the security group that's part of that access unit. All right, so what we can now do, and what you can now do for your external users, is provide a single URL for them to log into with a dashboard of all of the resources that you have published for that particular access unit. So inside this access unit here, we can have multiple different links, multiple different groups that can get really granular as well. But not only that, we can any individual user or any partner organization can be members of different access units. So there might be scenarios where, for example, under here, we give everybody read access to our extranet portal. But there might be a secured location under, let's just say, service for partners, where it could be the brand center that's secured. So what we would typically do is set up another access unit, grant access just to this brand center site, and add those external users into that access unit so they will get access to the entire extranet, and also that section there called brand center. And they will have access to that as well, even though that is a more secured part of that extranet. We can still add and allow people to use that area of our extranet as well. Now, Grant, that's probably all we're going to run through for the demo. Wasn't ideal in that we had a few technical issues. So if there are any questions or comments, or we need to dive into that a little bit further after this webinar, then I'm sure you'll provide some information to the attendees or the people that are watching where we can go through that in a lot more detail.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that we will put it down to the demo gods, which blesses many times during technology demos. But I think, yeah, if anybody has any questions just now, please feel free to ask them in the forum. We'll give it a few minutes, and yeah, we're more than happy to provide additional information. If you want a demo for other members in your organisation, then please feel free to reach out as well, and we're happy to do that. We'll also be sending out a recording of this webinar to anybody that's registered. So yeah, and I'm just having a look at the questions, and there's not much coming in. Is there anything you want to add, Daniel, or are we?
No, I don't think so. If there are, look, yeah, as I mentioned, if there are any further questions, then feel free to reach out to Grant and Digital First, and we can organise a more in-depth demo of that process and that solution.
Yeah, thanks very much. Okay, well, thanks a lot, Daniel, for joining us, and also Kenny gave some really amazing insights into B2B over Microsoft. So I think there's been a lot of really nice things talked about today. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you soon, hopefully.